Behind the dazzling light of fame and success hides a universe of mysteries and contradictions that surround the life of some of the most important celebrities of our times. So, in this compilation, we are going to delve into the fascinating biographies of these icons of popular culture, highlighting the mysteries that have enveloped their lives and have captured the public's attention for decades.
A pretty woman never needs money was the inspiring phrase that was said inside Roy Orbison's house that afternoon in 1964 when, as usual, the singer was in the middle of composing alongside Bill Dees. Everything happened during an interruption by Claudette Ferry, the performer's wife, who suddenly appeared asking for cash to go shopping, which jokingly prompted such a comment from Beard.
After some laughter, the woman left and the duo continued with their tasks without knowing that they were about to create one of the biggest hits of the 70s, Oh Pretty Woman, which became #1 on the popularity charts. But the successes and recognition were just a small fragment in the tragic life of Orbison, a talented man victim of a series of so unfortunate events that took away even his will to live. Forced to hide the suffering overflowing from his eyes with the help of his characteristic dark glasses, as if life wanted to charge him with interest, the prolific era that accompanied his songs, he saw himself at the bottom of misery more than once, ironically set by the sad consolation of the soundtrack composed by himself time ago. The pain of a fragmented love, the death of his children, and a buried career seemed to be the breaking point that would put an end to his glorious years in the music world. But the unexpected resurgence put him back on the rock and roll scene. But let me tell you the story of this great artist. And surely you have heard this song that I'm going to leave here a little piece that if you are watching this video on Facebook, most likely it will not appear due to copyright rights. Roy Kelton Orbison was born in Vernon, this in Texas, on April 23, 1936, and just 6 years later he got his first guitar, showing from then on his undeniable talent. After turning 8 years old, he began to participate in a local radio program, having as idols great icons of country and western music such as Letty Friesel, Hank Williams, and Jimmy Rogers. These small appearances were opening the way for him to become part of a musical group during his high school years, which played country and western rockabilly. We were the Wing Westerners, and I remember we were offered $400 for a show. That's when I realized that I could make a living playing music. He once recalled this in an interview. This is how he transformed his most beloved hobby into a possible economic livelihood that he could live on as he had always dreamed. However, at the same time, he continued with his studies as a plan B in case of artistic failure, graduating with a degree in geology. But his peculiar style put him in front of the ideal stages to reach the ears of established singers like Johnny Cash, who, captivated by the characteristic darkness of his voice, called Sam Phillips from the Sun label, who had worked with Elvis himself, to tell him that he should incorporate him. But contrary to what the musician thought, Sam responded with a refusal, arguing that no one told him who would release records on his label, words that he would soon overlook. Meeting Orbison one night, recognizing his talent, and envisioning the fortune he could make just by having this unique singer. Perhaps they chatted a bit about what they could achieve together, only that the producer's ambition made him very stingy with the payment of royalties. Therefore, Roy gave up on any deal, continuing his path that was increasingly leaning towards rock. After a trajectory of attempts and failures, it wasn't until the early 60s when the successes finally started to come, not without a journey in which at some point he gave up knowing how complicated it was to make a name for himself, which is why making a living as a composer seemed the most feasible. This worked for a while, getting his main source of income from the royalties of a song written by the Everly Brothers, who had included it in one of their works. Following this plan, Only the Lonely was born, a song written by him along with Joe Melson, and which did not have the best of receptions, being rejected by the aforementioned group and by the iconic Elvis Presley, despite being precisely a song thought and created for his melodious voice. At this time, he was already 26 years old, had a wife and 3 children to support. He thought that with the snub to his most recent composition, everything was lost, and he had set aside the option that would end up being his biggest hit, going back to the studio and recording himself. The result was totally majestic and impossible to ignore, both by the public and by the most representative and popular figures of rock. Roy Orbison began to sound everywhere, positioning himself among the top spots on the popularity charts. Only the Lonely opened the doors to various television shows, as well as gave him a story that would be told from generation to generation. It is said that after the song played on the radio, Orbis was fascinated. He went to a huge record store and bought as many copies as he could. Then he distributed them among his friends to encourage them to listen to his colleagues' masterpiece. As a result of this stroke of luck, he rose as Spoonman, releasing hits like In Dreams, Blue Bayou, Crying, Running Scared, It's Over, and many more, thus beginning his first period of success during the first half of the 60s. 5 years in which more than 20 songs from the performer remained in the top 40, earning the honor of becoming unparalleled classics. All this wave of hits before The Greatest of All or Pretty Woman was written. Surely you know what this song is. It's General Culture. It came in 1964, inspired by his beloved wife Claudette Ferry, with whom he had had a relationship since she was a teenager. The stir caused by this single made him one of the most coveted singers of those years. He sold more than 7 million copies, and after his contract with Monument Records ended, he was offered a millionaire figure by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer with attractive plans for the future. The aim was to make several records and 5 films, but their execution was submerged in a resounding commercial failure, opening the gap towards the most painful years of his life, starting with the love breakup with Claudette. With so much work, the singer's schedule was excessively saturated, causing him to put his relationship with his spouse in the background, who, consequent to the constant abandonment of her husband, started a romance with the architect who was building their new house. After this fracture, they separated for a few months before giving each other another chance and getting caught in the middle of a vicious circle of breakups and reconciliations. They remained this way for a while until June 1966, where after another attempt to save their marriage, they were finally separated by the death of Claudette. Both motorcycle enthusiasts, one afternoon they went out to enjoy their hobby, and a fatal accident claimed the life of the woman, who after losing control crashed into the back of a truck, causing her immediate death. Orbison suffered the departure of the muse who inspired his most successful song, thanks to which he tasted the sweetness of fame and signed million-dollar contracts. At the mercy of such pain, the abundance that once knocked on his door seemed light years away, but one way or another, he was able to recover to continue giving concerts. The man had no idea that the future was looking much worse. As time went on and he recovered more from his loss, another tragedy was lurking as a coup de grace to his misfortunes: the death of his 2 children, just 2 years after the first fatal blow in his cruel fate. In 1968, while he was giving a show at an English festival, the most heartbreaking of accidents occurred. His 2 children lost their lives in a fire that started inside their house, an event that ended up devastating him, taking away the little joy he found in their comfort. In the days following the incident, he didn't know how to overcome such pain, locking himself away and being unable to take care of the son he had left. He was the youngest and only survivor, sent to live with his grandparents. Sometime later, he gave himself a new opportunity in love with an 18-year-old German girl named Barbara Jacobs. As soon as they got to know each other a little better, they got married and became parents. By that time, his musical career was being buried deeper and deeper each day, becoming just a nostalgic memory. Roy's hits seemed from another era, remaining among the old records as what he once was. a sad reality he woke up to every morning but hard to accept. He carried with him enormous personal misfortunes whose sorrow was lessened thanks to small performances in whatever town or festival invited him to play. In this way, clinging to his prosperous past, giving up was not an option. He tried with all his might despite knowing that his records were no longer selling. And it was certainly only a matter of time before he suddenly resurfaced straight from the trunk of memories, which housed such iconic and once acclaimed songs like Oh Pretty Woman, The First Impulse, although somewhat weak, occurred in the early 80s. Covers of his songs began to be heard in the voices of singers like Linda Ronstadt and Don McLean, a duet with Emilio Harris, and appearances of his songs in movie scenes like Blue Velvet by David Lean. Small nods to his history as a musician, which indeed put him back on the map. There were fleeting moments unable to revive a dying career like the one he dreamed of. He spent too many months waiting for the triumphant return he so deserved, after having fallen into an extremely deep emotional rut, until suddenly it happened. Like a hurricane of fortune, prosperity, and unparalleled opportunities. They knocked on his door suddenly, nothing compared to what he had dreamed of in his darkest time. Because the outlook looked much better for the iconic figure with dark glasses and black dyed hair. It was the late 80s and a rain of record proposals took away the weight of his decline. In addition, the invitation to join the traveling Wilburys. It put the singer back on stage who lived rock in a different way since, contrary to his colleagues, Orbison just stood in front of his audience and from his stillness made the attendees vibrate with his unique voice, whose tone reflected darkness, as incapable of dancing as talented to sing, but that was enough to captivate the new generations. Suddenly, the new figure stood next to greats like George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Jeff Lynne, and Tom Petty. The youth wondered about the man whose appearance stood out among the others, being more rigid and noticeably older, despite being only 52 years old, relatively young. It was the toll of so many misfortunes, but they were forgotten as quickly as he took the microphone. Behind those black glasses hid a true legend, taking flight like a phoenix, reconquering those who once listened to him and adding admirations or admirers as he stepped on the stage. It wasn't long before, in the midst of his comeback, a special concert was held, primarily recorded for television and later edited for CD. This was called a Black and White Night, an event where great figures took to the stage to perform songs with Roy Orbison as a tribute. Among the honored guests were figures such as Springsteen, Tom Waits, Bonnie Raitt, Elvis Costello, and Jackson Browne. On the side, producer Jeff Lynne was working on a new album that would be named Mystery Girl, which was decided after an unexpected death. On the other hand, along with the traveling Wilburys, he reached his peak with the song Handle with Care. Undoubtedly, he was experiencing a triumphant return, reaping what he had sown with so much work throughout his career. Concerts around the world alongside artists of the caliber of Johnny Cash, with whom he had a conversation that meant much more than both of them could imagine. He confessed to feeling chest pains, but neither of them saw Bobby's fate coming. He was subsequently seen to be weaker, although his well-known lack of energy was only attributed to his annoyance with life. Knowing the series of heartbreaking events that I've already told you about that he suffered, no one was able to blame him. Still, he had plans ahead, including his biographical film in which he wanted to be portrayed by actor Martin Sheen. But his story would take an unfortunate turn on December 6, 1988, when after having lunch with his mother, he returned to his home in a Nashville suburb and suffered a heart attack. Nothing the paramedics did could help, once again cutting short his musical career at the age of 52, which again, I tell you, is a relatively young age. The difference was that now he would be remembered with great admiration, becoming in the following months the first artist since Elvis to have 2 songs in the American and English top 5 after his death, with the songs You Got It and Mystery Girl. His record sales skyrocketed, and he was awarded some posthumous Grammys. It could be said that his return was to remind the world of his unparalleled talent and to depart like the greats. Incredibly, 2 years after his death, his song "Oh Pretty Woman" had unexpected recognition. Crossing the line that radio programs or This Spot Goldies painted, it was the representative theme of the movie that launched Julia Roberts to fame, which had started as a drama denouncing exploitation, but ended up being a romantic comedy, Pretty Woman, with musical accompaniment by Roy Orbison.
It turned into the unforgettable scene of the girl walking through the streets of Beverly Hills.
The man who climbed onto the stage with his dark glasses, black dyed hair, no dance moves on stage, thought that after such tragedies he would never recover. But fate gave him another chance to establish himself as one of the greatest icons of 80s rock. A joy that lasted him little until his death in the year 88 at the age of 52. The Spanish rock world came to a standstill on September 4th, 2014, that tragic day, when the last glimmer of hope that Gustavo Cerati's family and loyal followers had to see him wake up from the coma that kept him submerged in his deep sleep for 4 years finally faded away. A musical legend whose legacy transcended all barriers departed from this plane, far separating the standards of a good singer-songwriter, composer, producer, but above all a key piece in the path of Latin American rock. It's no secret that his contribution in this area served to open the doors to bands with the same thirst for musical success. This artist is owed a lot, and proof of this is that his music continues to be part of the lives of millions of people. No one imagined that famous tour promoting his most recent and successful album, Fuerza Natural, would be interrupted in the most devastating way possible after a concert on May 15, 2010 at the Simon Bolivar University Football Stadium. This is in Caracas, in Venezuela. The most successful show of the tour, quoting the words of the singer-songwriter just after concluding the presentation. This series of concerts had started since 2009, crossing and contemplating various cities in Argentina, Mexico, Chile, United States, Peru, Colombia, and Venezuela, with a tour originated in Monterrey, Nuevo León on November 19, 2009, then to visit Guadalajara and Mexico City. Finally closed the year on December 19, 2009 at the Club Ciudad de Buenos Aires, hoping to return with more strength for May 2010, delighting fans from cities like Lima, Medellin, Tijuana, Bogota, Miami, and Los Angeles until he reached the show that would be the last of his life in Venezuela. His arrival caused great excitement and euphoria, even awakened nostalgic memories of when in 1997 he captivated his followers in the parking lot of the Polyhedron of that city, along with his Soda Stereo companions starring in what would be the last tour of the band, but those details we will address a little later. During his stay, he had the opportunity to learn more about the culture, gastronomy, and places to have a good time, like the nightclub called Moulin Rouge, where he was seen enjoying good times. The next day, he woke up excited for the night that awaited him in the company of his beloved band. They started in the afternoon with the sound check and all the preparations to get the stage ready and make history. The moment arrived hours later. Gustavo Cerati appeared in front of his thousands of spectators wearing a white suit with a jacket full of silver details. Supported by his musicians Coleman, Anita Alvarez Toledo, Leandro Fresco, Fernando Zamalea, Fernando Nale, and Gonzalo Cordoba, he opened the concert with the acclaimed song Fuerza Natural, leading into all the songs that for many years were embraced and received with fervor by his audience. Each song more acclaimed than the last. Suddenly, the entire stadium was at his feet. The Argentine transformed the Simon Bolivar stage into an intimate place to sing Cactus and Perdonar es Divino, a square that was complicit in giving him a thick fog. Critics like this could be read in different newspapers in Venezuela. However, even though the concert was full of emotion from beginning to end, there was a moment that stood out among the others. In the sublime way, he said goodbye by performing Lago en el Cielo. Well, there's a gift, not mine, from nature or whatever, for everyone, a lake in the sky. Thank you. Caracas. Cerati obviously said this with an extremely enthusiastic voice before starting to play the last song, whose lyrics echoed in the hearts of the attendees, and it stayed right. There, imprinted, "Forever, let's go slowly to find the time. It's sand in my hands." It was what they were chanting in unison with the singer, all his followers, who then ended the show with a guitar solo extended for almost 2 minutes. No one had any idea that those 2 minutes would unfortunately be the last they would hear such a musician play, making his last guitar solo the most unforgettable. He left the stage completely grateful for the response of the attendees, and as usual, he met with one of the musicians named Coleman and his dear friend Arian Taberna, who was in charge of sound checks and related issues. They used to gather in the dressing room to evaluate the performance, and on that occasion, they said it had been the best of the tour. They had a very good taste in their mouths. They chatted among themselves for a few minutes, food, drinks, and immediately Coleman went out to meet the rest of the team. Meanwhile, Adrian and Cerati were left alone.
I saw him very pale there.
He was there, he was near me, two heads, and I looked at him like that, and It's bad, I told him. Yes, why? No, I'm tired. And there he went back to the dressing room, and that was before the accident. The artist walked somewhat confused to the dressing room, hoping that with a little rest he would feel better, but that was just the beginning of the end, unfortunately. Just a few minutes later, his team found him lying on the couch with his shirt unbuttoned and his mouth slightly open. It was a sign that something serious was happening to him, but they never imagined the magnitude of the problem that was looming. As soon as they discovered the situation, they called the paramedics who were still in the event area. The attendees were just leaving the stadium, and it was not a good idea to make the incident more visible. They wanted to avoid at all costs any reporter lurking in the hallways noticing this. So they waited a little longer until after midnight to take the musician out on the ambulance stretcher. They headed to La Trinidad Medical Center, where they were forced to withdraw due to a short in the power supply, and set off to another health center to conduct the initial studies. When it was prudent, they returned to the first hospital and waited for news. As the hours went by, I was realizing the severity of what had happened, but I never thought about the consequences being so severe.
In this way, every second that passed became more and more complicated to keep the situation a secret. So at 5 o'clock in the morning on the musician's official Twitter account, the following message was posted.
Gustavo had a decompensation after the Caracas show, but we informed that he is recovering favorably. However, they could not be more wrong with this tweet. The media did not take long to gather information and connect dots to discover what was truly happening. It was then that they remembered how the singer had rescheduled concerts in 2006 due to suffering a thrombosis, but his current condition was mostly critical. Gustavo Cerati had suffered a stroke. He then learned of a surgical intervention carried out in Venezuela, and by June 7th, he's transferred to Argentina, where he would fight for his life for 4 years trying to come out of a coma, with his family hoping for a miracle that would return the beloved rocker to his life as he knew it. He had a rich history in music, a significant contribution, and undoubtedly still had so much talent left to share with the world. However, with each passing day, he was getting closer to his fate, which would turn him into a legend of Latin rock. This music genius from Buenos Aires, let me tell you a bit more about this character. Under the name of Gustavo Adrian Cerati, he was born on August 11, 1959, which means he passed away very young. He considered himself a neighborhood boy running with his friends through the streets of Baracas, where he spent his childhood. According to his mother, Lillian Clark, from a very young age, he showed a liking for music. He used to liven up family parties and school events with a guitar or a little wooden guitar. He also used to set the mood at birthday parties. In his adolescence, Cerati himself once recounted how he experienced it. I spent most of my adolescence in Villa Ortúzar. I lived like a normal kid. I have 2 sisters, and I was the one who was always out on the street with my group of friends playing ball. My most important activity outside of school was drawing. He remembered this in interviews. This boy with two artistic expression passions had to choose between music and drawing. Thus, despite being an excellent aspiring artist, he ended up fully dedicating himself to what he was obviously more passionate about, music. He was only 14 years old when he started forming his first musical groups and was in charge of the choir at the San Roque Institute College, an experience that provided him with the necessary foundations for his future as a musician. However, sometime later when he had to choose a university career, he opted for advertising, which only served to meet who would become the bassist of Soda Stereo months later. His name was Hector Zed. Goiter, both with musical talents. They established a close relationship from the beginning, becoming stronger during the summer of '82, a decisive time to complete what would be, one could say, one of the best rock bands in Argentina or Latin America. These boys, completely determined to become musicians, returned to Buenos Aires to form a band which would be none other than Soda Stereo, whose takeoff was completed with the arrival of the drummer, a boy named Charlie. She was actually known to Cerati's sister. She often called her on the phone until, let's say, by fate, he answered. The call was key to start a conversation about music, and they agreed on an audition to see if they could join as a band. From there, they wouldn't stop until they became what we know today as Soda Stereo, a highly relevant group in the culture of rock in Spanish with incredibly talented members. By July of '83, they began to make their first performances at the airport nightclub and at the Stott Free Pop, becoming an underground group, sharing stages with bands like Sumo and Virus. But their career would transcend much more than they thought. By 1984, they released their first album, Soda Stereo, which opened the doors to various festivals where the public's response was incredibly favorable. Like foam, their popularity grew to the point of presenting themselves as star guests at the Viña del Mar Festival and starting their own tour in '86. Nothing would stop them over the next few years, forging a 15-year career in total, whose work is distributed in 7 studio albums, which are Soda Stereo, Nada Personal, Signos, Doble Vida, Canción Animal, Dynamo, Stereo Dream, plus some live productions remained stable and without rest until Little by Little Family, personal and group situations began to become a bit murkier. In 1994, a tragedy shook the band, but especially the bassist who lost his son in a traffic accident. That was the first time the option of separating was put on the table. However, it would not become a reality until 1997, when the group leader made public a letter addressed to all his followers where he explained the sad news, for many, even devastating. These lines arise from what I have perceived these days on the street, in the fans who approach me, in the people who surround me, and in my own personal experience. I share the sadness that our dissolution news generates in many. I myself am immersed in that state because few things have been as important and rewarding in my life as your Asterio. In this way, he began to narrate, giving weight to a text that he surely wrote from a sea of mixed emotions, concluding with these words. This decision has come from within the group, and from there also generates a new excuse to meet again for the last time. The music which is what speaks and will speak for us best. A big hug and see you soon. Not only did he announce their separation, but also a final group tour to have the farewell they deserved. This began on August 30th, 1997 in Mexico City, passing through Monterrey, Caracas, and Santiago de Chile. Finally, their last stop was at the River Plate Stadium on September 20th, 1997. There, over 60,000 people would witness what seemed to be the last live performance of a group that marked generations. The morning of the last show, Gustavo woke up early and from the living room window spied on people who were already lining up from noon. Looking through the blinds, he amused himself thinking that no one down there could imagine that while they were waiting to see him turned almost into a god on stage, that same night he was right there taking care of the household chores at his home. This was recounted by journalist Juan Morvis in a column for the New York Times, supplementing the anecdote by saying the following. His apartment in Argentina is exactly 4 blocks from the stadium, and he had thought about disguising himself and crossing on foot, but the influx of the public was so large that the plan was impossible. As soon as it was 11:35 at night, the stadium darkened as a form of mystery, and so that only the flashes of the reporters' cameras would capture the historic moment. This is what Cerati fervently shouted on stage to give way to the first musical notes of In the City of Fury. It was a very strange day. I started the show very sad, thinking that it was the last time I played each song of the band. This was told by one of the members because neither he nor anyone else knew that in 2007 they would do a tour titled You Will See Me Return. However, that 1997 concert ended with an unforgettable phrase from Gustavo Cerati. And with a lot of mixed emotions, they got off the stage. Without a doubt, their reunion 10 years later was triumphant, giving fans a last experience of the group that crossed borders. However, Cerati never set aside music, making his way as a soloist to rock the stages until the last moment of his life. He enjoyed that last concert on May 15, 2010 like never before, just like his followers. Unfortunately, he left the venue directly to a hospital bed where he remained in a coma for 4 years until he died from respiratory failure. No, I doubt she'll become famous. I don't think I can handle it either. That's what Amy Winehouse said after the release of her first album called Frank. A prediction that on one hand exceeded her expectations, while on the other hand was fulfilled to the letter. She was unable to tolerate the global fame that overwhelmed her just 5 years after starting her career. A period in which her deterioration as an artist and person were the talk of the press until, unfortunately, she joined the famous and tragic 27 Club. The natural talent of this singer was enough to catapult her to the top in record time. Being a complete artist from songwriter, musician, and performer, she could not bear the weight of the gigantic success that, added to the disorders dragged from her adolescence, culminated in the worst way, self-destruction and tormenting voids silenced by the effects of substances and alcohol.
Amy Jade Winehouse was born in London on September 14, 1983.
She came to become the younger sister of Alex and daughter of a pharmacist named Janice and a taxi driver and salesman named Michelle Winehouse, part of a humble family and lover of jazz music. From a young age, she discovered her purpose in life. She knew she possessed the magnificent gift of a prodigious, distinct, and captivating voice, capable of giving her all the opportunities she wanted to step on the biggest stages. She was surrounded by talented singers like uncles on her mother's side who played in bands, and one of the most influential for her, her paternal grandmother Cynthia, with whom she had a strong bond of support and affection. She had experience as a performer and was associated with figures in the industry and even had a love affair with saxophonist Ronnie Scott. On the other hand, Mish Winehouse also came to be seen as a role model, being a loyal fan of Frank Sinatra as well as an amateur singer in bars and family parties. All this musical legacy seemed to draw a similar future for her, especially for far surpassing not only the vocal level of her relatives, but their style and originality. None of this went unnoticed by grandmother Cynthia, as it was she who insisted on enrolling her in an art school to polish her artistic skills. There she learned tap and began her formal education in vocal techniques in a more formal way. That same period was characterized by her first painful life lessons. Painful. The man she admired so much abandoned her before she turned 10 years old, as her father was actually in a relationship with another woman, something that made him ignore a large part of his children's education from much earlier. My mother practically raised her children alone, as my father, although present, was never really there. He was never there for the important things. I'm not talking about taking us to school. I mean, at night when we misbehaved, we would say, "We won't go to bed." My father was never there to say, "Listen to your mother." And that's what we needed. He said he was working. This was the interpreter's confession. Later in an interview, no one imagined that just that kind of abandonment would sow in her a wound impossible to heal. Soon, Amy's rebellious side intensified to such a degree that it became uncontrollable. Her own mother was unable to set limits. She went through her 10 years immersed in a transition, quickly shedding her childhood. She began to dress and make up somewhat older for her age, and suddenly, the piercings, the love relationships, and her first encounters with alcohol were added. Her father would return to her, but only after the effort to become a recognized singer, and it would be too late. For now, she found refuge under the warmth of her grandmother and her brother Alex, who taught her to play the guitar before she turned 14 years old. Then she already locked herself in her room to write her songs. Only in this way, she somehow forgot about everything that hurt her. However, apart from discovering her taste for composition, she also discovered something she called the best diet, which was actually her first experiences with bulimia. She founded some musical groups, and by the age of 16, she decided to drop out of school with the purpose of working in the entertainment section of a channel. In addition to using her free time to sing with a band called Bolsa. Little by little, in this way, she made her way as a singer and was selected by the National Jazz Orchestra of England. Without a doubt, Winehouse was professionally prepared for everything that would come next. Then, sadly, the same could not be said for her personal life. Her self-destructive behaviors, such as her eating disorder and her foray into the world of illicit substances, served as a foundation to bear the weight of her immense talent. She surrounded herself with completely unsuitable people for her, victims of her same ailments, as she had a group of friends who likewise binged on food only to later purge it. The problem then became so serious that even her brother Alex blamed this disease for making the singer so weak as to face the other addictions that added up during her career. He said in an interview, "We all knew, but it was almost impossible to confront, especially on a topic that was not even discussed." And bulimia was a really dark matter, much more than it seems. Her disorder was really severe, and this is not a revelation, it's something anyone could know just by looking at her. She would have died anyway, the way she was going, but what killed her was bulimia, and that's terrible. On this unstable path, she met the musician Taylor James, who in addition to becoming one of her closest friends was her partner, and who gave her the push she needed to showcase her work with a record label. Thus, in 2002, Amy signed a contract with the creator of American Idol, Simon Fowler. The recordings of her first album began while, for her part, she continued singing jazz at the Cobden Club. However, the producer tried at all costs to keep the identity of the talented girl a secret until the anticipated launch, although he did not count on the sensation caused by a voice as unique as hers, even if it was only heard in choruses. It was by sheer chance that the music executive Darkus Bees heard her on one occasion while he was showing a compilation of The Winds of Brothers, where the performer participated by doing some voices. The infatuation was immediate. However, the manager was strictly forbidden to reveal his identity. In this way, months passed before Darkus finally discovered the face and name of the mysterious singer. By then, Electric and Musical Industries discography had signed her, as well as a strong collaborative relationship between her and producer Saddam Remy. However, nothing could prevent the word from spreading, and soon Virgin was added to the list of interested parties, causing 4 record labels to compete for the talent of a singer whose debut was still behind the scenes. The experienced ones in the music industry knew perfectly well that the woman would turn out to be a goldmine. It was only a matter of time before her name and her music sounded all over the world. With that certainty, the album Frank was released on October 20th, 2003. The singer was just entering her 20s and was starting one of the most successful and short careers in the last millennium, making herself known to the world through songs enriched with jazz influences. All were written by her, except for 2 covers produced by Remy and praised by critics, even being compared to the very Sarah Vaughan. One of her most representative idols, The song Stronger Than Me positioned itself at the top of the British charts, surpassing all her expectations considering the response she gave to a reporter when asked whether she would be famous or not. How famous are you going to be? My music doesn't fit on that scale. I don't think I'm going to be famous.
I don't think I could handle it either.
These were the singer's words, and she was obviously wrong in half of that answer. Her music would cross borders, reach so high that the fall would be so devastating and unable to bear as she predicted. After Frank's success, she decided that she would be the one to make all the decisions regarding her music. She hired the band of New York singer Sharon Jones as accompaniment both in the studio and on tour, and included her father in the production process. Later, in 2006, work began on the release of the album Back to Black, a project produced by Michelle Winehouse and Remy that would become one of the best-selling and most awarded in history. It was officially released at the end of October of that same year, and just 3 months later, it was already on the most listened to list, adding to its sales every day until it reached 1,085,000 copies in a year. It ranked 7th on the Billboard chart, and Rehab, one of its most popular songs, was rated by Time magazine as the best song of 2007, generating a highly favorable opinion. She's insolent, funny, embarrassing, and probably crazy. It's impossible not to be seduced by her originality. That's what the review said. But millions of people still surrendered to such a work of art. Everyone loved her, but no one imagined the desolation behind each word written in her songs. As her career grew, so did her depression, making the melancholy she carried with her on stage more evident at each concert. One of the saddest nights, that's how a critic described her show, held at the Birmingham Stadium. I saw an enormously talented artist reduced to tears, staggering on stage and unforgivably cursing at the audience. Soon, the excesses made it impossible for her to continue with the tour that had sprung from the Back to Black album, allegedly on medical advice and communicated by the press with a message that alluded to all the emotions the performer was going through. She needed to rest completely. But the awards that came later were far from giving her the peace she so desperately needed, away from the spotlights.
It was in February 2008, one of the most significant nights in her career, winning 5 Grammys: Album of the Year, Song of the Year, Best Female Pop Vocalist, Best Pop Vocal Album, and Best New Artist.
This moment, when it was impossible for her to be present as it was considered too risky to interrupt her rehabilitation, she had no choice but to thank via satellite, dedicating her glory to her native London, to her parents, to Ronson, and also to her then-husband Blake, the latter being the epicenter of all the sadness that actually enveloped the album, whose name was translated into Spanish as Back to Black. Amy Winehouse had already fallen into an extremely deep pit to the point of not enjoying that moment as she deserved. She was sober and lucid. However, she let her assistants know that she didn't like that state at all, with a very disturbing comment. "This is very boring without drugs." Such a situation revealed how her life seemed insufficient to her. He really needed to self-destruct to be at peace. It was precisely that feeling of self-sabotage that led her to become so hooked on the eternal love of her life. Blake Fielder, a love from which the worst and the best of her existence was born. No wonder her songs caused a furor. They practically bordered on a bibliography detailing the darkness that man dragged her into. They had met in 2004. They were like magnets, completely attracting each other. He who had cut his veins at 9 years old, and she who already suffered from bulimia at 14. Imagine this bomb. Two people marked by the wounds of the past who, far from helping each other to heal, together they worsened for each other. Especially for the singer who, despite consuming illicit substances before, had never gone further with the most dangerous and addictive ones. She gave everything for him, including her dignity, until a year later, Fielder stabbed her in the back by returning to his ex-partner. Amy, imagine, could not recover from such a betrayal and did what she knew best: take refuge among pills, food binges, alcohol, and substances, but above all writing, creating her best work, Back to Black. but this would not be the end of their chaotic relationship. All the songs on Back to Black talk about our relationship. No one had made me feel what Blake did when he came into my life. It was a cathartic love. The way we treated each other made me feel bad, but we broke up and realized how much we loved each other. That's what she said in an interview after their reconciliation. We loved each other intensely and probably in an unhealthy and codependent way. She also emphasized in this interview. The couple got married on May 18, 2007, but their twisted way of being happy didn't last long, as Drake was jailed for assault, bribery, and attempts to obstruct justice. As for her, by 2009 she filed for divorce and tried with all her courage to rehabilitate herself by spending a few months on an island to detoxify and compose new songs thinking about her next album. She had ups and downs, but the fight against alcohol was the most difficult and impossible to overcome. She continued to give some concerts, which were always a surprise since it was impossible to know in what state she would arrive. And that's exactly how her last performance on June 18, 2011 in Belgrade was recorded in history. Lost, wandering among the musicians without any direction, not knowing the lyrics to her own compositions and mumbling indistinguishable things. Nothing remained of the artist from 4 years ago who dominated the stage with her imposing presence and incredible voice. From receiving standing ovations, she was now booed and dismissed from the stage as if she had never been the very same Amy Winehouse. A month later, her gloomy reality overtook her. It was July 23, 2011, and inside her room lay her lifeless body, reclined on the bed and surrounded by empty vodka bottles. She had 0.416% alcohol in her blood at the time of her death, more than 5 times above the legal limit.
In England,
she left this world due to alcohol poisoning, joining the famous and tragic 27 Club, where the names of Brian Jones, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, and Robert Johnson stand out. By the way, if you want me to make a video about this, let me know down in the comments. take that deeply rooted taste much further. For his part, the eldest showed talent for the piano, while Karen was only limited to contemplating the wonders that her father's old records provided her. Her destiny was headed towards music, but that would come a few years later. For now, she liked to spend time practicing one of her favorite sports, baseball, for which she had a natural talent. The afternoons playing with her friends, always accompanied by her brother, were spent practicing this sport. The Carpenters were very close, and wherever one went, the other would follow. Their relationship, as I was saying, was good, but sabotaged by Agnes, who often got upset with her daughter for being chosen before Richard. The natural talent she had for playing the drums. Later, after her graduation, with so much practice on that instrument, she was ready to take the next step. So together with her brother and other friends named Wes Jacobs, they formed the Richard Carpenter Trio. They started by mainly playing jazz in different bars in Hollywood, gained some experience, and by 1966 that gave them the confidence to participate in a music contest. Being so good, they were awarded the main place obtained as a prize to sign a contract with the record label, Radio Corporation of America. However, contrary to what they expected, the realization of an album never materialized, so the member Jacobs, somewhat disappointed, decided to leave the group. Perhaps it was a small stumble for the talented brothers, but not enough for any of them to give up what they enjoyed doing the most, especially Richard, who during this last time had been watching the great virtues that his sister demonstrated. She had potential that, if used properly and strategically, would bring fortune to the family. Important thing was the appearance of the Carpenters trying to maintain that smiling image to their audience. Thus, they had to hide truly worrying things, such as Richard's addiction to methaqualone, a sedative recommended for combating insomnia that began to exert a strong power over him. His parents did not accept the seriousness of the situation, so Karen was the only one trying to dissuade him from that habit that was doing him so much harm. As for her, she was dealing with her own insecurities and voids in her heart caused by her mother's constant contempt. Not to mention that soon an obsession would be added to her life that would ultimately take her life away. Soon the media focused their attention on her physique more than her talent, treating her with derogatory nicknames such as chubby, plump, or a bit overweight. In her teenage years, the girl had already suffered from such labels that led her to maintain a constant diet. But the strong attacks from the press triggered an even more aggressive body dysmorphia in her. While she had distorted her body shape throughout her life, nothing compared to the immense insecurity that was secretly growing within her, as big as her career success, translated into eating disorders somewhat unknown at that time to be known as a disease only by very few people. An almost invisible monster that finished off its victims until it consumed them completely. Even the case of Karen Carpenter today is considered one of the first to capture the attention of families where there were girls suffering from this disease. The journey the young woman took was very hard until she became unrecognizable as a walking specter of pure skin and fragile bones. Diets became her obsession. Stepping on the scale was a challenge she almost daily sought to win by losing weight. She needed to feel better seeing how the numbers went down day by day, fading away just like her own life. The success of her music and performances went hand in hand with the news of her evident anorexia and bulimia. It soon became known that she was taking up to 90 diet pills a day, as well as an alarming amount of laxatives. Pure poison as an ingredient for a deadly recipe, which also included a syrup of ipecac used to induce vomiting.
By the year 1975, she weighed only 41 kilos, the same year she was named by Playboy magazine as the best drummer of the year.
A completely unbalanced scale between her professional and personal life. At the same time, the other band member was fighting his own battle with addictions until he was admitted to a clinic for recovery in 1979. During this time, when the duo had also lost some popularity, Karen wanted to take the opportunity to make a solo album. And with the support of manager Jerry Weintraub, she had no trouble achieving it. The album was produced by New Yorker Phil Ramone, famous and sought after for his excellent work. Composed of 12 songs and with a style different from what was usual, the singer showcased her talent by performing something more in the disco style. However, despite the magnificent result, when she excitedly showed it to her brother, he received it with very little acceptance. It was certainly nothing more than his jealousy manifesting itself, going so far as to dissuade the record company executives from burying it under lock and key until 1996. 13 years after the tragic death of the singer and at the request of her brother, who had nothing to lose by then. The disappointments only contributed to focusing on his weight. Perhaps he couldn't control what was happening around him, but he could control what he ate and what he didn't, worsening his health condition immeasurably. By 1981, this condition had become more noticeable, and during a tour in Europe, she caused a scandal in a pharmacy because they wouldn't let her buy a large amount of laxatives. As a result, she returned to New York and was taken to see one of the few experts in eating disorders, Stephen Levenkron. The professional suggested a family meeting, considering the important role emotional health plays in these types of situations, but her parents were unable to comprehend the horror their daughter was going through. For Agnes, witnessing the young woman's frequent fainting, brittle nails, and hair falling out everywhere wasn't enough. She was actually dying, you could say slowly. However, dragging all that pain, what seemed like an opportunity to be loved would soon arrive. She met Tom Burbis, a recently divorced real estate agent with a gentlemanly facade. The man spared no unfulfilled promises and details to make her believe that he came from a good family, hiding the real reason why Tom had set out to win her over by any means necessary. In reality, he was dragging along unpayable debts and was looking to benefit from the wealth of the woman who became his wife on August 31st, 1981. Breakfast. Karen married happily, but overwhelmed by the feeling of betrayal, as a few weeks before the wedding, he confessed to having undergone surgery to not have children, something she longed for with great anticipation. If she finally agreed to marry, it was due to the pressure from her mother, who did not want to look bad with those who had already received the cordial invitation to the event. The woman threw her daughter to the altar only to avoid a scandal, so to speak. Contrary to what was imagined, this marriage brought her, misfortunes rather than joys. An additional burden to the family suffering and drama that was causing her so much harm. Boris not only did not love her, but he insisted on making her feel insignificant, adding more fuel to the fire of her uncontrollable self-loathing and her body. He makes mocking comments like, "You can see all your bones." Fortunately for her, she had the courage to end that farce of a marriage a year later. Despite her attempts to improve and admit herself to a hospital to be fed and hydrated, undergoing a treatment that allowed her to consume solid foods and gain a little weight, nothing was enough. Simply because on her fragile bones was the overwhelming burden of a neglectful family. A month after enduring the loneliness in the hospital room, she returned home on that sad November 16th when, upon crossing the door, the people she called, the ones she calls home, acted with absolute normality and indifference. The only thing in her hands was the memory of the joys brought by music, and she focused along with her brother on resurging as what they once were. They recorded Made in America, and despite the work being well received, questions about her illness arrived at the same time, something she fervently denied in front of the cameras. However, she couldn't deny it forever, because sooner or later the consequences of her anorexia and bulimia would take their toll at the highest of prices. She was 32 years old and weighed 38 kilos when death reached her on February 4th, 1983, collapsing in a room at her parents' house, where she never received a word of encouragement, a caress, or a shoulder to lean on to overcome her worst battles. Remember that on this channel, we upload videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Saturdays are the podcast with my partner Edson. There is also the Pepe Misterio channel, where there are videos on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. They are videos of around 20 minutes, and Retratos Revelados is on Mondays and Wednesdays. This is a new channel where I talk about famous characters, but in a form of trivia or guessing game. Thank you.